March 1854. In a small Wisconsin schoolhouse, a few anti-slavery Americans sparked a movement they believed could rescue the nation from collapse. Their party would soon elect Abraham Lincoln, abolish slavery, and then walk away from its own ideals. Modern headlines show a party transformed. But how did the journey from liberation to polarization really happen? The answer begins with those first bold promises and their first compromise. March 20th, 1854. In a small schoolhouse in Ripon, Wisconsin, 53 men and women gathered, their nerves sharpened by news from Congress. The Kansas-Nebraska Act threatened to let slavery spread west, overturning decades of uneasy compromise. Alvin Bovey, a local lawyer and former Whig, called the meeting. He had spent weeks canvassing neighbors, convinced that only a new political force could block what he called the slave power from dominating the nation. The group represented a cross-section of the North: farmers, merchants, free soilers, Whigs, and anti-slavery Democrats. By the end of that night, they resolved to dissolve their old parties and unite under a new name, one that Bovey had discussed with Horace Greeley of the New York Tribune 2 years earlier. They chose Republican, reaching back to the ideals of Jefferson and the founding generation. The name was meant to stand for liberty and opposition to any aristocracy, especially one built on human bondage. Within months, the idea spread. Newspapers picked up the story, and similar meetings erupted across the Midwest. On July 6, 1854, delegates from Michigan gathered under the Oaks in Jackson, formalizing the party's first platform. The message was clear: halt the expansion of slavery, protect American industry with tariffs, build infrastructure for a growing nation, and offer free homesteads, 160 acres for anyone willing to work the land. These planks blended the free soil movement's moral urgency with the Whigs' economic vision. By 1856, the Republican Party nominated John Fremont for president and carried 11 northern states. The coalition that began in a schoolhouse was now a national force, united by the promise that every person should have the right to reap the fruits of their own labor. Abraham Lincoln's victory in November 1860 sent a shockwave through the country. He won 180 electoral votes, carrying every northern state, but not a single one in the South. As southern states seceded, the new president faced a nation coming apart at the seams. The Civil War tested the Republican promise of liberty. In the White House, Lincoln weighed every move, waiting for the right moment to strike at slavery while keeping the border states loyal. On January 1st, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring freedom for over 3 million enslaved people in Confederate states. The war's toll was staggering, but the Republican Congress pushed forward. They passed the Homestead Act, offering land to settlers, and funded the Transcontinental Railroad. Radical Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens demanded even more, pressing for full citizenship and voting rights for freedmen. Their efforts led to the 14th Amendment in 1868, granting equal protection, and the 15th Amendment in 1870, securing black men's right to vote. For a brief moment, black voters elected thousands of officials, reshaping Southern politics. In 1877, a disputed election ended with a backroom deal at Washington's Wormley Hotel. Republican Rutherford Hayes secured the presidency after a special commission awarded him contested electoral votes. In return, federal troops withdrew from the South, ending Reconstruction. The hopes of radical Republicans faded as white supremacist governments reclaimed power. The party's founding ideals had survived a war only to be compromised in the peace that followed. Steel mills roared to life and railroads stitched the country together as the 19th century closed. Republican leaders, many with deep ties to banking and industry, pushed for tariffs that shielded American factories from foreign competition. The McKinley Tariff of 1890 set rates at 49.5%, driving up prices on imported goods and filling federal coffers with revenue. Party boss Marcus Hanna, a Cleveland industrialist, built a formidable campaign machine that linked Republican fortunes to business interests. In 1896, William McKinley's victory locked in the party's alliance with the urban North and the rising industrial class, but prosperity bred unrest. Farmers and workers, squeezed by trusts and rising costs, pressed for reform. When Theodore Roosevelt took office in 1901, he broke with party tradition. Roosevelt launched 44 antitrust suits, challenged railroad monopolies, and set aside 230 million acres for conservation. His vision, called New Nationalism, called for a strong federal government to regulate the economy and protect ordinary citizens. In 1912, after President Taft won the Republican nomination, Roosevelt bolted to form the Progressive Party, called the Bull Moose Party. The split fractured the Republican vote. Roosevelt captured 27% of the popular vote, the strongest third party showing in history, but the divided party handed victory to Democrat Woodrow Wilson. The 1912 electoral map showed the cost. Republicans lost ground in the North and West, exposing deep rifts between business conservatives and progressive reformers. The old unity around tariffs and industry had given way to a new battle over the party's soul. The stock market crash of 1929 wiped out fortunes overnight. By 1932, unemployment reached 25%. Breadlines stretched for blocks in cities across the country. President Herbert Hoover, a Republican, insisted that prosperity was just around the corner, but his policies failed to stop the spiral. When voters went to the polls in November 1932, Franklin Roosevelt carried all but 6 states, winning 472 electoral votes and pushing Republicans into political exile. In Congress, the party was left with only 2 Senate seats after 1936. For the next 2 decades, the Republican Party struggled to find its footing. The New Deal's popularity made opposition risky, yet many Republicans remained wary of government expansion. As the South remained solidly Democratic, the GOP base was confined to the Northeast and Midwest, with little presence below the Mason-Dixon line. Change began to stir in the 1960s. In 1964, Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater ran for president. He rejected the Civil Rights Act and called for a return to states' rights. His campaign lost in a landslide, but he carried 5 deep South states, an outcome that startled party leaders. Internal campaign memos from the time show deliberate outreach to white Southern voters who felt alienated by civil rights reforms. 4 years later, Richard Nixon's campaign adopted the Southern strategy, using coded language about law and order to appeal to those same voters. The 1968 and 1972 electoral maps tell the story. States that once belonged to the Democrats began flipping to the Republican column. By the early 1970s, the party's geographic base had shifted. The economic crisis of the Depression and the debate over civil rights had redrawn the political map, laying the groundwork for a new Republican coalition. Ronald Reagan swept into office in 1980 with 489 electoral votes, promising to cut taxes, shrink government, and rebuild American strength. Within a year, the top federal income tax rate dropped from 70% to 50%, and by 1988 it had fallen to 28%. The Economic Recovery Tax Act reshaped fiscal policy, while inflation tumbled and defense spending soared. Behind Reagan, a new political force gathered. Moral Majority, led by Jerry Falwell, rallied millions of evangelical voters and transformed the Republican base. By the late 1980s, conservative ideas dominated party platforms, blending free market economics with religious activism. In 1994, Newt Gingrich and his allies unveiled the Contract with America. That November, Republicans gained 54 seats and seized control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. The coalition forged by Reagan now commanded Congress, setting the stage for a new era of political confrontation. Terror attacks in September 2001 brought a new era of urgency to Republican politics. Congress passed the authorization for use of military force, giving President George W. Bush broad power to pursue threats abroad. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq dominated the decade, but at home, the financial crisis of 2008 tested party unity. The $700 billion TARP bailout split Republicans in Congress and fueled distrust of elites. In 2010, a wave of Tea Party candidates won 63 House seats, channeling anger over spending and government expansion. By 2016, Donald Trump won 304 electoral votes with a message aimed at working-class voters and skepticism toward global trade. Today, the party's priorities center on border enforcement, inflation, measured at 3.2% in 2025, and a more confrontational stance on foreign policy. Populist energy shapes the agenda, linking grassroots insurgency to national power. Partisan shifts aren't just history, they shape how Americans debate the economy, borders, and democracy itself today. In a nation where 40% of voters now identify as independent, the party's identity crisis is not over. What comes next could redefine American politics yet again. Share your thoughts below.